It was one of those days where the sky can't make up its mind. Half sun, half clouds, and a chill in the air that settled into your bones. I stood there at the foot of his grave, hands stuffed deep into my jacket pockets, trying to find the right words. People had already started to drift away, murmuring their goodbyes and offering those tight, sad smiles you give when nothing you say could possibly fix anything. It was just me and him now. Well, me and a patch of earth and a headstone with his name carved into it like it was supposed to make sense somehow. Like it was supposed to explain how a man so full of life could just, poof, be gone. Bro, I said, my voice cracking, I really miss you. The wind picked up a little, tossing dead leaves across the cemetery like some invisible hand was trying to paint the world in sadness. My wife's pregnant, you know. 8 months now. I kicked at a pebble, watching it bounce down the hill. I was thinking. I laughed, and it sounded wrong in the cold air. How about you reincarnate as my child? I waited, half expecting the ground to crack open and his old smart-aleck voice to come booming out. You wish, man, but there was nothing but the rustle of trees and the faint hum of traffic from the road beyond. Wouldn't that be something? I said, quieter this time. Come back, hang out for a lifetime or two more. I stayed there a long while until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched out thin and tired. Finally, I touched the top of the stone, a clumsy kind of goodbye, and made my way back to the truck. The air smelled like rain and the world felt hollow, like somebody had knocked the stuffing out of it. Over the next few weeks, life picked up that stubborn rhythm it always does after loss. You wake up, you go to work, you smile when you need to, but inside there's a quiet space where someone used to live, a space you keep stepping into without meaning to. I didn't talk much about that day at the grave. It felt too personal, too sacred. Besides, who would believe it? Most folks would just shake their heads and mumble something about grief messing with your mind. Then, 1 month later, my wife went into labor. It was a long, messy affair, hours that stretched on like rubber bands ready to snap. But when it finally happened, when that baby boy let out his first holler, it was like a jolt of electricity ran through the room. He was big, bigger than we thought he'd be, with a strong grip that wrapped around my finger like he wasn't planning on letting go. I remember holding him, looking into those deep, stormy eyes, and feeling something shift, something old and familiar staring back at me, like someone had found their way home. Of course, I shook it off. New dad jitters, right? Sleep deprivation and a head still heavy with old grief. That's what I told myself. Fair jazz. But deep down, somewhere past reason and logic, a little voice whispered, what if? What if he heard me that day? What if he answered? The first few weeks with a newborn are a blur, a collage of late-night feedings, endless diaper changes, and a kind of tired that sinks into your very bones. But even in that fog, there were moments that stood out, bright and sharp as a knife. Shy-ho. Like the way he looked at me, I mean really looked at me. Not with the unfocused stare of a newborn, but with an intensity that sometimes made me forget to breathe. It was like he knew me from somewhere far beyond this tiny hospital room, far beyond this brand new life. We named him Jacob. Jake for short. A strong name, a good name. Something that felt right the second I said it out loud. I remember cradling him in my arms, feeling the surprising weight of him, watching his tiny fingers flex and curl like he was learning how to hold the world all over again. At night, when the house settled into that soft hush only new parents know, I'd sit there by his crib, just watching him. Sometimes he'd smile in his sleep, and for a flicker of a second, it was like watching my old buddy grin at me from across a bar table, beer in hand, daring me to make the next move. You're seeing things, my wife said when I brought it up one evening, our boy nestled between us on the couch, his little hands flailing wildly as he cooed. Maybe, I said, but deep down something in me resisted letting it go. Jaha? The signs kept piling up. Tiny things, things you'd miss if you weren't looking. The way Jake would scrunch up his nose when he didn't get his way, that same scrunched up look my friend used to flash right before pulling off some harebrained scheme. The way he seemed to despise green beans with the fiery passion, twisting his face up and spitting them out exactly like my buddy did during those late-night diner runs back in the day. Even his laugh, when it finally came, was low and raspy, a chuckle that seemed far too grown-up for someone who hadn't even taken his first steps yet. One night, I had a dream so vivid it rattled me awake. I was back at the old fishing pier with my best friend, lines in the water, the sun setting in a riot of orange and gold. He turned to me, grinning that familiar grin, and said, "Don't think I left you, man. I'm right here, always have been." I woke up with tears on my face and the soft sounds of Jake's breathing filling the room. At his 6-month checkup, the pediatrician said he was developing ahead of schedule. Strong grip, steady gaze, babbling like he was trying to hold a conversation already. "He's an old soul," she said. smiling down at Jake as he grabbed her stethoscope with surprising determination. Some kids just come into the world ready. I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle into my chest. Ready. Yeah. Like he'd been waiting for this second chance. Family and friends noticed it too. My dad pulled me aside one afternoon after a barbecue in our backyard. The smell of charred burgers still hung in the summer air, kids laughing and chasing each other around the picnic tables. You know, he looks just like him, right? Dad said, nodding toward Jake, who was gnawing determinedly on a set of plastic keys. Like who? I played dumb. Dad just gave me that look, the kind that didn't need words, and clapped a hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, he said quietly, the ones we love don't really leave, they just find a new way back to us. By Jake's first birthday, the resemblance was uncanny. Same sharp chin, same stubborn set to the jaw, even the same mischievous twinkle in the eye, like he was perpetually on the edge of some private joke. We threw a big party, balloons, cake, the whole 9 yards. Somewhere between the second round of happy birthday and the first slice of chocolate cake, Jake looked right at me, smeared frosting on his nose, and let out a laugh so pure, so familiar, that it nearly brought me to my knees. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was littered with wrapping paper and the last glow of candles, I sat holding him on the porch, the stars blinking quietly overhead. You found a way, didn't you, buddy? I whispered, feeling him snuggle closer against my chest. Some wishes are too big for this world to ignore. And some souls just find their way back home. As Jake grew, the signs didn't just continue. They multiplied, blossoming into full-blown reminders that gnawed at the edges of my mind. It wasn't just the look in his eyes anymore. It was the way he carried himself, the stubborn tilt of his head, the easy mischief that seemed stitched into his very being. By the time he was 2, he had developed a habit of tapping his fingers against the table whenever he was thinking, just like my buddy used to when we stayed up late planning road trips and big dreams that never quite got off the ground. I caught him doing it one morning over breakfast, absent-mindedly drumming the same 3-beat rhythm that had once driven me crazy. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. "What's funny, Daddy?" Jake asked, his voice soft but sure. "Nothing, bud," I said, "just remembering an old friend." He smiled at me then. A wide, knowing smile that didn't belong to a toddler. One night, after putting him to bed, I found myself digging through an old box of photos in the attic. Pictures of me and my best friend, fishing trips, bonfire nights, lazy Sunday mornings with hangovers and coffee. I picked up one where we were sitting side by side, arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing like the world was brand new. Nasmuster. Something made me take the photo downstairs. The next morning, I casually placed it on the coffee table, curious if Jake would notice. He toddled into the room, still half asleep, and stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto the photo, and he toddled closer, peering down at it with a furrowed brow. "That's me," he said. I froze. "What do you mean, buddy?" He pointed at the picture. Not at me, but at my best friend. "That's me. I'm funny." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but he had already wandered off, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like an old song my buddy used to belt out during car rides. I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to believe, wanted it so badly my heart ached. Another part, the skeptical grown-up part, told me I was chasing shadows in my grief. But then came the night he asked about the lake. Bonnie Hamwin. We were driving home from grocery shopping, Jake strapped into his car seat, chattering away about nothing and everything, when he suddenly grew quiet. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him staring out the window, lost in thought. "Daddy," he said after a while, "can we go to the lake?" "What lake, buddy?" "The one with the wooden dock and the fishing poles." I nearly swerved the car. We hadn't been to any lake since he was born. The only wooden dock he could possibly be talking about was the one where my best friend and I had spent so many lazy afternoons. "Maybe someday," I said carefully, my throat tight. He nodded like he understood something deeper than his words could say. Later that night, after Jake had fallen asleep, I sat out on the porch with a beer in hand, staring up at the stars, trying to make sense of everything. Was it possible? Could souls really find a way back? I thought about the times I had felt him, those fleeting moments when the world seemed to bend just slightly, when a familiar laugh would echo from a stranger, when a song from our past would play out of nowhere. Maybe some bonds were too strong to be broken. Maybe some promises, spoken or unspoken, were too sacred to be left behind. The next weekend, I packed up the truck. Fishing rods, a cooler, a couple of sandwiches. Just me and Jake. We drove out to the lake, the old one, where the wooden dock still stood weathered but proud against the lapping water. Jake ran down the dock ahead of me, his tiny feet slapping against the wood, arms wide like he was embracing the world. He stopped at the end, peering down into the water, and then looked back at me with a grin so pure, so achingly familiar, it brought tears to my eyes. "I remember this place," he said softly. I dropped the gear and knelt beside him, pulling him into my arms. "Yeah, buddy," I whispered into his hair. "Me too." As the sun dipped low, setting the lake on fire with gold and crimson, we cast our lines into the water. Two souls, one old, one new, sitting side by side, tied together by something stronger than time. And in that quiet, sacred place, I stopped questioning. I just believed. After that day at the lake, something shifted between me and Jake. It wasn't anything you could put a finger on. It was in the air, in the quiet understanding that passed between us with a glance or a smile. The bond had always been there, but now it felt sharper, more defined, like a line etched into glass. Jake started talking more. Full sentences, ideas that seemed too big for someone barely 3 years old. And not just about toys or cartoons. He'd say things that felt ancient, wiser than his years. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the back porch, he turned to me, his little legs swinging off the edge of the step. "Daddy, do you remember when we got lost in the woods?" I blinked. Lost in the woods? That was something that had happened to me and my best friend when we were teenagers. A memory I hadn't thought about in years, let alone shared aloud. "What woods, buddy?" I asked carefully. He grinned, a mischievous sparkle lighting up his face. "The woods, where you said you could read the stars, but we had to sleep in the truck instead." My stomach dropped. That wasn't a story we kept in photo albums or family gatherings. That was ours, just his and mine, a moment stitched deep into the fabric of our friendship. "Did Mommy tell you that story?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. Jake just shook his head and leaned against my side, content. Things like that kept happening. He'd hum old songs, not nursery rhymes, but classic rock tunes that my buddy had loved. He'd instinctively pick up a baseball and pitch it with the same quirky sidearm throw that used to drive our high school coach crazy. One Saturday morning, I decided to test it. I dug out an old duffel bag from the garage, the one stuffed with mementos from my younger days, ticket stubs, keychains, even an old beat-up leather jacket my friend and I used to fight over. I laid the items out on the living room floor while Jake napped. When he woke up, he wandered into the room, his hair sticking up in every direction. His eyes scanned the spread and then, without hesitation, he toddled straight to the leather jacket. "Mine," he said, wrapping his tiny arms around it. I swallowed hard. "You sure about that, Jake?" He nodded solemnly. "I wore this when we went to the fair." The fair. Another memory. One hot summer night spent riding Ferris wheels and winning stuffed animals we were too old for. I watched him, this small, fierce bundle of a boy, clutching the jacket like it was a lifeline. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. Later, when my wife got home, I told her everything. Sat her down and spilled it all. The lake, the jacket, the memories. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she just nodded. "I've seen it too," she said softly. "In little ways, the way he looks at you sometimes like he's known you forever." Relief flooded me, mixed with something bittersweet. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't alone in seeing the impossible. That night, lying in bed with the moonlight spilling across the floor, I realized something important. This wasn't about proof. It wasn't about logic or evidence. It was about faith. About honoring the bond that had always been bigger than just one lifetime. Jake stirred in his sleep down the hall, murmuring something I couldn't quite catch. I smiled, feeling the weight of gratitude settle over me like a warm blanket. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Some were meant to be cherished. And some, the best ones, were meant to be lived. Even after everything, the lake, the jacket, the memories, there was still a sliver of doubt tucked away in the corner of my mind. I guess that's human nature. We want to believe, but part of us still demands proof. So one rainy Saturday, while the world outside blurred into a wash of gray, I decided to set up a test. I went into the attic again, pulling out an old shoebox full of keepsakes. Inside was a treasure trove of things only my best friend and I would recognize. A cracked compass he'd sworn could lead us anywhere. A dented harmonica he never learned to play, and an old keychain shaped like a football helmet from the championship we almost won. I laid them all out on the kitchen table, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Jake came toddling in, dragging his favorite stuffed bear by one arm. His face lit up at the sight of the little objects, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "Come here, buddy," I said, patting the chair beside me. He climbed up, resting his chubby elbows on the table, surveying the lineup like a general preparing for battle. "Do you know any of these things?" I asked, keeping my voice light, casual. He reached out immediately, fingers closing around the compass. "This is mine," he said. "Oh yeah," I prompted. "What's it for?" Jake grinned, the same sly grin I knew so well. "To find the secret trail." My heart skipped a beat. We had spent an entire summer inventing a secret trail that we pretended led to buried treasure, wandering for miles with that compass spinning uselessly in our hands. He picked up the harmonica next, giving it a few tuneless blows before laughing in that raspy, familiar way. "Never could make it sing," he said with a shrug. I stared at him, my mouth dry. No way he could know that. No way unless, finally he grabbed the football keychain, spinning it between his fingers like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "I dropped this under the bleachers," he said absently. "You found it?" I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at this little boy who held pieces of my past like they were pieces of himself. Tears blurred my vision and I reached across the table, pulling him into a hug so fierce he squealed with laughter. "I missed you," I whispered into his hair. "I missed you too, Daddy," he said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The rain drummed against the windows, a soft, steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, like the world outside was holding its breath right along with me. In that moment, every doubt, every question, every fear melted away. He had come back, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as something more real, more miraculous, carefree. As my son. Some people might spend their whole lives waiting for a sign, a miracle, a second chance. Quote, me. I was holding mine right there in my arms. After that night, something inside me shifted for good. There was no more room for doubt, no more second guessing. It was like a door had been opened in my heart, one I didn't even know was there. And the light pouring through it warmed places inside me I thought had gone cold forever. Jake wasn't just my son. He was a bridge between two worlds, two lives, two versions of myself. The past and the present, tied together by this little boy with stormy eyes and an old soul. The days that followed felt different, richer somehow. Every laugh, every hug, every moment was saturated with a kind of meaning that made my chest ache with gratitude. One afternoon, we went out to the old ball field, the same scrappy diamond where my best friend and I had spent endless summers striking out and sliding into home plate like heroes. It hadn't changed much. The chain-link fences were still bent in places, and the scoreboard hadn't lit up in years. I brought an old glove and a scuffed baseball, more out of nostalgia than anything else. I didn't expect Jake to take to it. He was barely 4 after all. But the second he put on that oversized glove and I lobbed a soft pitch his way, he caught it clean. Clean, like muscle memory handed down across lifetimes. He laughed, that raspy, familiar laugh, and threw the ball back to me with a lazy flick of his wrist. It wasn't perfect, but it was the throw. His throw. "You're a natural," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Jake just grinned and said, "You taught me." That night, I found myself digging through old photo albums, piecing together fragments of a life that now felt closer than ever. There we were, young, reckless, alive, sunburned faces and calloused hands, dreams bigger than the sky. I thought about the promises we'd made, the kind you make when you're young and think you're invincible. Promises to always have each other's backs no matter what. To find a way back if we ever got separated. Dofas, maybe this was him keeping that promise. Pas. Maybe this was both of us keeping it. Jake continued to grow, and with every passing day, the bond between us deepened. It wasn't just about memories anymore. It was about the life we were building together. We had inside jokes, like the way he'd call green beans nature's punishment, or pretend to lose to me in checkers, only to pull off a last-minute victory with a smug grin. We had routines, Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night movies, impromptu dance parties in the kitchen with music cranked up too loud. But beyond the laughs and the traditions, there was something quieter, something sacred, a sense of being seen, truly seen, by someone who knew you down to your bones. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies blink into existence, Jake turned to me, his voice serious. "Daddy, do you think we get more than one life?" I looked at him, at the way the fading light caught the curve of his cheek, the stubborn tilt of his chin. "I think some connections are too strong for just one life," I said. "I think some people find the way back to each other no matter what." He nodded, satisfied, and leaned his head against my shoulder. We sat there in the gathering dark, the world soft and humming around us, And I realized I had stopped looking for explanations. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need proof, or logic, or understanding. I just needed this. Starbucks. This boy, this life, this miracle. Jake yawned, his breath warm against my arm. I'm glad I found you again, he mumbled, half asleep. Tears stung my eyes, and I pressed a kiss to his hair. Me too, buddy, I whispered. Me too. The stars came out one by one, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called out into the night. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt whole. Truly, impossibly, wonderfully whole. Time has a funny way of stretching and folding when you're living in moments that feel larger than life. Before I knew it, Jake was 5 years old, full of questions, full of life, and carrying with him a spirit that never stopped surprising me. One crisp autumn afternoon, we went for a walk through the woods near our home. The trees were shedding their leaves in brilliant waves of gold and crimson, and Jake darted ahead, chasing after the falling colors. He picked up a stick and swung it like a sword, slaying imaginary dragons, just like my buddy and I used to do when the world was nothing more than a playground of possibilities. Daddy, Jake called out, his voice carrying through the trees. Do you think we knew each other before this life? I caught up to him, smiling as he twirled around with his makeshift sword. Yeah, bud, I said. I think we've known each other a very long time. He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to battling invisible foes. As we walked, I thought about everything we'd shared, not just the memories that echoed the past, but the new ones we were building every day. It was a strange, beautiful blending of old and new, as if life itself had decided that some bonds were too important to leave to chance. Understanding had settled into me over time, not all at once, but slowly, like a sunrise creeping over the horizon. This wasn't just about my best friend finding a way back to me, Bayless. It was about life continuing, love enduring, lessons echoing forward through time, Bayless. Jake was his own person, a mixture of the old and the new, the past and the future, wrapped up in a boy who could find wonder in a pile of autumn leaves and wisdom in a simple question. One evening, after a day spent raking leaves and drinking cider by the fire pit, Jake crawled into my lap, heavy with sleep. Daddy, he murmured, I think you were my best friend once. I held him tighter, my heart swelling with a bittersweet ache. I think so too, buddy. The fire crackled beside us, casting long shadows against the twilight, and I realized that understanding doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes, it comes with acceptance. With love. With the quiet certainty that some things are bigger than questions, bigger than lifetimes. And as I sat there, rocking Jake gently, I knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, we'd face it together. Because some promises don't end. They just begin again. Years slipped by like pages in an old familiar book. Jake grew from a boy into a young man right before my eyes. Tall, strong, full of life and questions about the world. Every once in a while, he'd turn his head just so, or laugh in that certain easygoing way, and it would catch me straight in the chest. It was like catching a glimpse of a memory walking around in flesh and bone. He wasn't a copy. He wasn't a replacement. Jake was his own person, with dreams bigger than I could have imagined. But still, there were parts of him that felt like echoes of someone I'd once loved with every part of my soul. And somehow, that felt exactly right. On the eve of his 18th birthday, Jake and I sat out on the back porch, a couple of old wooden rocking chairs creaking beneath us. The sky was a mess of stars, scattered like somebody had spilled a handful of diamonds across a black velvet cloth. The air smelled like summer, cut grass, warm earth, a whisper of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. He sat there, quiet for a long time, his hands laced together, just staring up at the sky like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. You ever wonder about before? He asked eventually, his voice a little rough with hesitation. Like, before we get here? Before we remember anything? I looked over at him. The kid? No, the man, who'd once fit in the crook of my arm now towered beside me, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, wise beyond his years. All the time, I said, my voice low. Jake nodded, slow and thoughtful. Sometimes I dream about places I've never been, people I've never met, and I miss them. He let out a soft laugh, almost embarrassed. Is that crazy? I leaned back, letting the chair groan under me. Nah, I said. I think the heart remembers things the mind forgets. We sat in silence for a while after that, letting the night wrap around us like a blanket. In the stillness, memory stirred, fishing at the old lake, late-night drives talking about everything and nothing, jokes and dreams shared over beers and heartbreaks. My best friend, my brother in all but blood. I closed my eyes, feeling the bittersweet ache of it all, and when I opened them, Jake was still there, real, breathing, alive. I realized then that life wasn't some straight road we walked down until the end. Yes, à la bow. It was a loop, a spiral. Connections folding over themselves again and again, souls finding each other across oceans of time. Yo, Jake wasn't just my son. He was a bridge between past and future, grief and hope, loss and love. And somewhere deep inside, I believed my friend had heard me all those years ago, standing by that lonely grave with my heart split wide open. He'd found a way back, not to repeat the past, but to build something new, something better. The porch light flickered, casting a soft glow over Jake's face. He turned to me and smiled. That same easy, familiar smile that had seen me through some of the hardest days of my life. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "For everything." I didn't have words big enough for what I felt, so I just reached over and pulled him into a hug, the kind that says all the things language can't touch. Somewhere above us, a shooting star burned a silver line across the sky. Mace to a hug. A promise kept, Raj, a journey completed. A new one just beginning. As I sat there holding my son, my friend, my heart finally felt whole again. Life had broken me once, but love had found a way to stitch me back together, thread by shining thread. And as the night wore on and the stars blinked patiently overhead, I knew one simple truth, written deeper than any scar or memory. Some souls are meant to find each other, again and again and again